Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Marcela Sanchez. I'm a communications officer at the World Bank. Julie Katzman is the Executive Vice President and Chief Operating Officer at the Inter-American Development Bank. She joined the IDB Group in 2009 as General Manager of the Multilateral Investment Fund. And 18 months later, she was appointed Executive Vice President of the IDB and is currently responsible for managing the overall operations of the bank, which, if I have the information right, for this year is around $12.5 billion for development in Latin America. She's pioneering an institutional transformation to further the IDB's emphasis on achieving, measuring, and reporting tangible results and improving access and availability of these results. She has also been championing progressive diversity, inclusion, and women's economic empowerment agendas. Currently, Ms. Katzman serves as on the board of directors of the MacArthur Foundation and the International Center for Research on Women, and the board of advisors of Instituto de Empresa in Madrid. So let's welcome Julie.
Thanks, Marcella. And yeah, I do spend a fair amount of my time saying, you know, the World Bank. Okay, so we're the World Bank, but for this region. So, well, thank you all very much for inviting me here today to share a few words. And, you know, most of the time when I come to the podium, people expect some conversation about economics and the finance side of things. But I'm going to change things up a little bit today in what I'm going to talk about, because the program today has covered such important policy and research areas and then shared really powerful stories. And I think you can't step away from those stories without saying to yourself, I need to do more, I want to do more, and how can I do more for young women in India, from Syrian refugees, thinking of girls and young women in Kenya and Afghanistan, and how can we change the conversation? So with that in mind, I'm going to start with a few pictures on the screens. And I start with a warning, which is they are pictures that are likely to upset and to enrage. But they're pictures that go with the story that we're trying to tell. So I start with this picture of Adolf Hitler. You can't help when you see this picture of recalling the 6 million European Jews and 11 million others who were put to death in the Nazi concentration camps. This iconic picture of the landing at Normandy, it's a reminder of the devastating and massive loss of life, resulting from World War II, which is believed to have resulted in 85 million people dying, civilian and military, throughout the course of the war. And that painful and engulfing experience of the deaths in World War II catalyzed world leaders to create institutions, as imperfect as they may be today, to maintain international peace and security through means other than war. Or the images of landmine victims and children without limbs that remind us of the 110 million unexploded landmines in 70 countries around the world. And it was learning that with removing 100,000 mines per year, it would take 1,100 years to rid the world of those unexploded landmines that led to the Mine Ban Treaty, which has been signed by 162 of the world's 195 countries. Over the span of 100 days, between April 7th, 1994 and mid-July, over 1 million Rwandans and 70% of the Tutsi population were killed in a genocide campaign that again reminded us of the cost of inaction. The outrage and the aftermath of that genocide led to the creation of the International Criminal Court so that we wouldn't again have to put together ad hoc tribunals to face the perpetrators of future genocides and war crimes. These photos and those events prompt almost universal responses of disgust, of anger, of thoughts of never again. And by doing so, they've united large swaths of our humanity to leverage those moments and that outrage to do good. Indeed, Largely as a result of these images, we've come to pledge to one another that these sorts of things will be remembered and that we'll work hard to ensure that they do not happen again. But as horrific as these events were in history, their impact pales in comparison to the cost of present-day domestic violence. Violence against women, girls, and children remains pervasive in almost every society on the globe. And over 1.2 billion women have been physically or sexually assaulted by a former or current partner. I always like to put these numbers in some sort of perspective. That's China. And although the rate of domestic violence differs and was highest in Middle East, Africa, and Southeast Asia, 37%, that same rate is 20% in Latin America and 30% in Latin America and 25% in the US, in Europe, and in Asia. And I'm sure that everybody in this room knows that each month, more than 15% of all children are subject to what the United Nations calls severe physical punishment. And together, the economic cost of domestic violence against children and women is $8 trillion per year. Again, only 2 countries in the planet have gross domestic product of 8 trillion or more, and that's China and the United States. But today, those images of battered women and children do not universally conjure up the same level of rage and horror that we all felt in looking at those images at the start. Campaigns for change succeed when they touch our hearts and they touch our heads. They succeed when they're relentless, when they're pervasive, when they tell us about the human cost that's involved, when they're inescapable, palpable, and personal. Campaigns like Mothers Against Drunk Driving, which began with one mother who lost her teenage daughter to a drunk driver in 1980, and which has forged a powerful coalition that created cultural change. Today, drunk driving is unacceptable everywhere. Designated driver is a term that has become part of our vocabulary. Free rides home from bars is a very common thing. And deaths from DUIs in the United States have fallen by almost 2/3 in that period of time. Smoking, which was once cool, hard to believe, but now smokers are stigmatized. They have to stand out in the rain far away from the rest of us to get their hit of nicotine. And today, smoking in the US is at a historic low. It's 17% of the population versus the 45% it was when we started measuring in 1956. And in Australia, which is another country that has been relentless in this campaign, smoking has dropped by 2/3 to 16% of the population. So the question is, are we at a similar point in time where we can catalyze public sentiment that does exist to launch as successful a campaign and truly end violence against women and children? Perhaps we're not there yet, but we're close. And I think it's a moment whose time perhaps has come. And I say that because if you look around the world, you can see instances that are not just in the US and not just in Europe, but throughout the planet. So let's start in South Africa, where 57% of the 145,000 women who are murdered each year in South Africa die as a result of domestic partner or family violence. Last month, the South African Salvation Army, which is truly a tongue twister, used that crazy viral sensation about the dress in London to talk about violence against women. So you maybe saw this dress, which people went online and voted, was it gold and yellow, or was it black and blue? And I know you're looking at this picture, if you weren't a part of this, saying, well, how could that have happened? But it really did. And they used the ad to, as you might be able to see, and I'm not sure if you can, to ask the simple question, why is it so hard to see black and blue? And that too went viral. Or India, where over 10,000 demonstrated in December 2012 after the horrific gang rape and brutal beating of the student on a bus in Delhi. But that wasn't the end, because shortly thereafter, thousands more demonstrated to insist that there was a need for a change in legislation and effective enforcement, which led to the establishment of a judicial commission, which did exactly that, looked at those laws. And that commission received 80,000 comments, which here in the US would not have been seen as a huge number, but in India was of historic proportions, of suggestions on how to amend those laws and provide quicker investigation and prosecution of these cases. And now cases of abuse are in fact being prosecuted. Or the US, where the NFL truly bungled their response to the Ray Rice abuse of his fiancée. The public's unexpectedly strong reaction to that prompted a change in NFL policy. But not only that, to a much greater focus on and an understanding of the importance of the issue. And almost all of the professional sports leagues in this country have adopted or are in the process of adopting much stronger rules and different kinds of policies in their locker rooms. And then that gave rise to the No More campaign. 114 million people saw the powerful ad of No More during the Super Bowl this year. And that ad underscored that real men don't abuse women, and they cannot remain passive or silent in the face of suspected violence. Or in Brazil, where in February they inaugurated the first of a series of 26 integrated service centers for survivors of violence, one in each state, that will provide a set of integrated services that includes police and specific courts and public defense, credit, training, psychosocial counseling, job placement, and child support. Or the UK, where David Cameron and his entire cadre of senior ministers sponsored an international conference and supported the creation of the FGM prevention program, funded with £1.5 million to put an end to female genital mutilation and child marriage within a generation. Major steps to stamp out those practices included new legislation that will mean for the first time parents can be held accountable and doctors will be prosecuted if they fail to protect their daughters from being cut. So we can see momentum. And right now, we're going to play a video clip for you that shows you that this truly is global.
No more, she was drunk.
No more, he was drunk.
No more, she was asking for it.
No more, she never said no.
No more, not in this family.
No more, not on this team.
No more, we don't talk about that.
No more bystanding.
No more ignorance.
No more excuses. No more.
Jeg spør deg, vil du ha Geir som står ved din side til din ektefelle?
All of the kings would fall into place. This was the year I was starting to die and live very healthy.
Dalle uno schiaffo. Uno schiaffo, forte. Uno schiaffo. No?
No.
E perché no?
Perché so.
So we put those images together because I think it really does tell us that something is happening out there in the world. And what we need to do is to raise the volume behind each and every one of these things, something that every one of you in this room does every day in the work that you do. Can we, if we do that, shift this conversation even further down the road and make a difference and increase the number of voices that are heard, the number of audiences that we reach, the number of decibels that we put behind the audience, the number of mediums that we use, the data that we gather, and the dollars that we invest. All of us, in our own way, and in ways that some of today's panels have mentioned, the one that I just walked in on, which is elevating the attention of the political leaders in the various countries in which we work. My organization, the IDB, has worked on gender equality and fighting violence against women for decades. Now we are working on raising the volume, increasing the visibility and centrality of this issue, not only with the policymakers who are our natural counterparts, but with civil society and with the private sector, particularly in countries where gender equality and violence against women are not that high on the policy agenda. All of us can do this, raise the volume so that those images of battered women that we saw elicit from anyone and everyone the same kind and the same level of outrage, disgust, and horror that we all feel and felt when we saw those iconic images from history. So thank you very much.